So it's the word rampage that dominates Rupert Murdoch's titles: The Times, London, and the Scum. And the Daily Mail controlled I newspaper says it's random murders at random in Nottingham. 6 people, 3 have been murdered, and 3 others nearly murdered. And it still is not terrorism. How is that? So, terrorism is not about the actual evidence. When the Member of Parliament, Jo Cox, was murdered, she was murdered by a known, self admitted terrorist. But he wasn't treated by the media in Britain as a terrorist. How come? This is the Baby Angel Geronimo edition of the Khoodeelaar television channel being broadcast at the time is at 0740 GMT, but we are starting a few minutes earlier than that. This is Wednesday, the 14th of June 2023. So, going back to the racist cover up of the massacre in Nottingham yesterday, the scum is calling it rampage, as is the Times, both owned and controlled by Rupert Murdoch. Now, in Manchester, there was this Muslim who created a terrorist attack during a cultural performance by the American artist. And that is correctly described as terrorist. Whereas all the other murders and massacres that have been taking place in the UK, as of course they have been taking place in the USA, are not described as terrorism or terrorist related because, based on the perpetrator in each of the massacre and heartbreaking, devastating attacks, the perpetrator is white or a non Muslim, not a Muslim, or not known as a Muslim. It's like the Times newspaper, which is admitted after the death of the Russian scholar, writer, novelist, campaigner, human rights campaigner, and philosopher, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, that while he was alive, he wrote a letter to the Times and they suppressed it. Even Alexander Solzhenitsyn did not qualify as a fit person to be published as a writer of a letter to the Times. So, all this stuff that they publish under the banners of letters, most of this stuff is absolutely insignificant. No letter to the Times really appears to make any moment, if you like, or create a historic moment. no revelation, no disclosure, no worldwide sensation about the evilness, the depravity, and the badness that go on every day in the United Kingdom, for example. So, what's the point of a letter to the Times? And the Times has got the nakedest picture of a woman today. Not the sun. The nakedest picture belongs to a woman who is described as being aged between 19 and 90. And her name is Miriam Margolis. And she is described as among 17 LGBT pioneers who feature in the July 2023 edition of the Vogue magazine. I mean, what is on display in that picture is not her intellect, her humor, or a caustic comment, but something else, entirely physical, entirely thoroughly sexual. So, this is the actual priority of the Times, which has been described recently as being edited by a Tory fanboy called Tony Gallagher in the Private Lie magazine. And the rest of the Times news coverage or cover up is again artificial shallow, mostly repeating shallow items and topics that are not addressing, let alone reflecting, the badness, the lies, the corruption that dominates the UK society in terms of the decisions being made by the holders of various positions of power in the state. And they say this morning of horror began with blood curdling scream at 4 a.m. Not terrorism. This is two-page spread on the Times. Still not that two-page spread, and that heading still doesn't include the word terror. So what are they doing with the terrorism? Terror, the word terror has become, as it was inevitable in the Crusader narrative going on for more than 1,000 years. It was the latest word to terrorize little Englanders in the context of England and to brainwash them, to incite them into hating Muslims ever more, even more. How could this be justified? How could this be justified? Who said that? An Irish poet, didn't he? In his mother's sister. How could that be justified? And of course, there is this Times has got another picture of two women near naked in a waterfalls. Near the heading is schools shut as demand for water soars in heat wave. These are not moral issues. These are not ethical issues being addressed about society. And there is this piece about heading headed Brexit took ministers focus off virus threat. Now, this is related to the start yesterday, the 13th of June 2023, of the so called inquiry into the COVID 19. And the health correspondent of the Times says national lockdowns and school closures had barely been considered by officials before the pandemic. The COVID 19 inquiry was told yesterday at its first full hearing. Hugo Keith, a licensed law trader with the label KC, King's Counsel, the lead lawyer said the government had given very little thought to the possibility of having to shut down the nation and was taken by surprise. Now, we have said, and we are saying, and we have been saying that despite the fact that the National Health Service was allegedly founded in 1940s, the principles of the National Health Service in the United Kingdom have never been actually honored, respected, let alone supported. And the and the fact that the National Health Service still is the main provider of health care for people in the United Kingdom makes it even worse, as many times worse as the numbers of casualties, people who were massacred during the last COVID outbreak, which is what they're talking about now. Now, here is a map or a diagram which is on page 13 of the Times, and it's a complicated diagram. It says pandemic preparedness and response structures in the UK and England, August 2019. So, what they actually are going to do, they're going to do exactly what in Britain they do about every major disaster, every major failure by the state and by the collective or collection of agencies that make decisions affecting people's lives and people's livelihood and so on. So this one is Brexit took ministers' focus off virus threat. It cannot be said it was about Brexit only. It is about everything else because, as Margaret Thatcher echoed the deniers of society, she said that there was no such thing as society, which is what the conservatives in government in 2020, 2019, 2020 were doing. And even this criminal, Quentin Letts, racist, fascist, liar, anti democratic, pop political sketch writer, is admitting that yesterday's beginning of the so called inquiry, he is not saying so called, I'm saying it's so called, had one aspect of it. Ushers came with boxes of tissues for the public. Of course. And this is actually one aspect of the real truth about zombified population. And people like, well, the ones that were pictured in the Guardian in Nottingham yesterday, there is no shortage of people rushing to the stated scenes of the massacre, lighting candles and leaving flowers. It's one of the rituals, one of the most familiar rituals that happens. And no lesson is learned because nobody is held to account, nobody pays. And this raises the question as to the extraordinary resources and dedication that were applied to, within quote, take care of Boris Johnson, who was allegedly stricken with COVID 19. There are too many questions about Boris Johnson. What actually happened? How did his illness compare with the illness of others, some of the mentionable individuals? For example, like Derek Draper. Derek Draper, who is the husband of one of the ITV presenters, Kate Garraway, was also in his political prime, if you like, was part of the bureaucracy. And Draper has been linked with many events and incidents that actually show light on the dark aspects of the Blair regime or Blair fronted regime. But that makes him a recognizable name. For years now, Draper has been struggling to stay alive with the help of Kate Garraway, his wife, very dedicated, and lots of sympathy and support from ordinary people from across the country and beyond. But whereas Derek Draper has been struggling, Boris Johnson recovered within a very magically short span of time. What are the differences? Because one of the claims made about the way that he was treated was that the medical health staff that were involved in the looking after of Boris Johnson were made to enter, if you like, effectively non disclosure agreements. Effectively. So the actual truth is not known to this day as to what happened and how did somebody who was ill with COVID 19 not only survived but behaved as if he had never been ill in the first place. And the way that Johnson has been going about his vigorous depravity and evilness, even this week, shows that he never had even the slightest illness ever, let alone the deadly COVID 19 that was allowed to massacre any number of people in the United Kingdom. And the rules that Boris Johnson brought into being as the incumbent at number 10 Downing Street were rules that were forcefully enforced against ordinary people, whereas Johnson brazenly broke them. So much so that he has been even now claiming to have not known what he was doing was wrong, that he was not told that what he was doing was wrong against the rules. So there is this abject immorality, corruption, criminality dominating the commentary, the observations of the mainstream so called media. Everything in the newspapers warrants truth based, truthful scrutiny. Now, this item about the murder in Liverpool of the 26-year-old woman Ellie Edwards will go down as one of the items from which lessons will not be learned. How is it that in that area, Liverpool, Merseyside, so many innocent people have been targeted by murderers, gangsters? How is it that these gangsters and murderers are not detected by the police? What are the police doing? What do the police in England do? So, the lack of preparedness for safeguarding and saving people from the pandemic that is being talked about in the Times today, which editorially says that the lesson should be about how to save people in the future. Not only should the proceedings be about what happened in the past, but the more important thing should be to make sure that people are saved in the future. That is absolutely correct. But even the Times will not tell the truth about those aspects of the preparations that are the subject of comments by members of the public, writers of letters. That is the point I made, that the Times doesn't make any significant difference in the letters that it publishes. So the Times letter has become absolutely obsolete in the main, to the point that the editor of the Times letter boasts that the well established practice pattern of publishing letters, prioritizing letters for publication as Times letters, is the shortness, the brevity of the thing. Surely that must be wrong. The Times letters should be about the content, about the quality, not the share, about the length, but by showing, by admitting that the letters are published based on the shortness, the brevity of it, the Times has given away the game. That it's not about substance, it's about a gimmick, it's about a kind of stunt. If it makes you giggle, then it is worth publishing. If it makes you think, then it's not worth publishing. Which takes us to Macaulay, of course. How many languages are in use daily by media organs across the globe? How many languages are used by newspapers every day in the world? Let's check. Well, there is no answer to the question how many languages are used in the media, in the newspapers. The only country that they talk about in terms of the multiplicity of languages is in India. Again, they're talking more about India than about anything else, any other country. So it's relevant to Macaulay, India, of course, But the point is that it's not English. The languages that are used in India, for example, by newspapers, are non English Indian languages. What was the main focus of the attack by the imperialist racist Macaulay, who condemned not only the Hindi, the Sanskrit language, but also the Arabic and the Urdu. He acknowledged the existence of Arabic, Urdu, Sanskrit languages in India, but he condemned them. He, Macaulay, said that all the languages and all the books and materials available across the subcontinent, which of course at that time was of course included what is now Pakistan, what is now Bangladesh, and what is now the Republic of India. And Macaulay dismissed them all. So, although they don't talk about Macaulay these days, what the Times is doing, what the Guardian does, what the Financial Times, edited by a woman apparently born in Lebanon and raised as a Muslim, Rola Khalaf, even the Financial Times does that. And they're in absolute abject denial of the world, which takes us back to the lack of preparedness and to face another pandemic. And that takes us back to the lack of support and real preparation, real care, real provision of care through the National Health Service. That was ideologically absolutely perfect when it was published in the 1940s, which, in a similar comparable way, as a cure for a sick society, applies to what Starmer has been doing through the Labour Party. Starmer has been politically murdering the Labour Party, which is our statement, has been our statement. By that we mean that every aspect of the Labour Party that is intended to cure the particular ill of society is being neutralized by Starmer. That is the political murder of the Labour Party, which means that he is abolishing the Labour Party and he is at work creating a replication of the Conservatives. Everything about Starmer, everything about his style, about his content, about his narrative is very much going back to the darkness. Whereas the founding purpose of the Labour Party was to do the opposite, enlighten and share enlightenment, fight for justice and establish justice. How the most worthwhile aims and purposes, which is what the Labour Party's founding principles underlay, which is what the Labour Party's founding principles underlay, those have been turned upside down. And this political murderer, this scum, Keir Starmer, has got in bed in darkness with the darkest of the forces in society, undermining, threatening, and denying the enlightening need and urgency of the need for enlightenment, justice, equality, fairness, compassion. The founding principles of the Labour Party promised, potentially. And the fact that there are occasional, not always, but occasional references to those principles in effect, not necessarily literally, but in effect, by some, the minority of the leadership of various trade unions, as opposed to the as opposed to by the members of the parliamentary Labour Party in the House of Commons, let's say, shows that the Labour Party doesn't exist really politically, democratically. The Labour Party has never existed really politically in Parliament. Whatever Harold Wilson did, because contrary to the public normal kind of admissions, Harold Wilson was engaged in a daily precarious series of battles. But intellectual kind of a moment, the gravity and the contents, the substance that were needed for him to succeed and to turn the Labour Party in power into a structure, an engine, a motion, a movement that resembled a kind of direction towards the aims and purpose of the Labour Party. There was no intellect, really. Richard Crossman really didn't constitute the necessary intellectual substance that was lacking, that was missing. These are people that were remarkable, the likes of Crossman, because they were in a minority numerically within the Labour Party, general numbers of members of parliament. The majority of the members of Labour Party MPs were intellectually deficient. In the context of the Labour Party's founding aims, not in comparison with the Conservatives. I'm talking entirely about the context of the founding aims of the Labour Party. And the fact that they weren't says, as it is saying now, decades later, that the Labour Party has never stood for the purpose and the aims the founders had for it. What happened in Tower Hamlets? What is now Tower Hamlets? What happened in Poplar in 1921 gave the game away about the Labour Party, because the rest of the Labour Party across the country were not really mobilizing in solidarity with the Poplar councillors. And the fact that the Poplar councillors had to go to jail in order to defend their electors, their community. That showed that the Labour Party across the country didn't exist. They took the risk and they went to jail. That was something unprecedented. And the narrative about their going to jail, the narrative remains potent but hasn't been told, hasn't been explained, hasn't been discussed. So when the so called Labour Party bureaucracy goes about selecting members of council wards in the name of the Labour Party or members of parliament potentially for the constituency, the lessons that are inherent in the actions of the Popular Labour Party councillors, Labour councillors, are not applied, are not brought to action, which is how the crisis of housing, for example, is festering. Because the housing crisis should not have existed, at least not as starkly as a big phenomenon as it does. Not in Labour Party controlled council areas. The fact that it does shows that the Labour Party controlled councils are not doing anything at all that are consistent with the founding aims and purposes of the Labour Party. That the Labour Party controlled councils are not doing what democratically, ethically, transparently, and based on needs should be happening. So when Robin Wales, the incumbent in the post of elected executive mayor at the expense of the people of Newham, he was there in that post starting from 2002 until 2018, 16 years. When he said that if you can't afford to live in Newham, you can't afford to live in Newham, what he was saying in that short statement was that, as far as he understood it, the Labour controlled Newham Council had no duties towards people and their housing needs. He was an agent of the market of housing, not social provision of housing. And since Robin Wales got replaced in 2018, and his replacement, Roxana Fias, got, quote, reinserted on the 5th of May 2022. What Robin Wales did has not been overturned, it has been getting even worse. So, what's the difference? Those who did support the idea that somebody other than Robin Wales should be allowed to seek election to that post in the name of the Labour Party in Newham. What did they say? What did they expect? And what have they delivered in the last 5 years? There is no answer. Because in Newham Council, there is no democracy. There are careers, petty, pathetic careers being maintained, and the regular parks, the money, the allowances are being collected by the councillors who call themselves Labour Party councillors. But that's it. There is no accountability. And there is no evidence that in the near future, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, there is no likelihood that the Newham Council would become anything like the council that it should become, which is to take on the duty that it owes as a democratic local council to the voters, to the local community, to the demography. Newham councillors will never identify themselves with the people of Poplar, the Poplar councillors. Nor would the councillors of Poplar or entire hamlets, which is now made up of the merged three previous boroughs that got merged in 1965, Poplar, Bethnal Green, and Stepney. They're not. Most of them, in truth, are not really aware of even the phrase Poplar councillors. So the newspapers are not representing the needs of the people, needs of society, nor are the local councillors. And if you look at the actual sequence of events of the last, let's say, 7 days, with the perennial congenital liar Boris Johnson now producing surprise after surprise in order to carry on, hanging around like he's now doing this week, today, that he's delaying the publication by the Privileges Committee of the House of Commons of the report of their inquiry into his breaking of the rules. You can see that the members of parliament, including the Privileges Committee, including the Speaker of the House of Commons, are morally timid. Politically lacking in direction, and are not fit for purpose for the society. Which takes us back to the inquiry that started yesterday into the COVID-19 preparedness, which is that there is nothing in the proceedings, the actual proceedings of the members of parliament, the House of Commons. If you look at the last 50 years, there is nothing that has been initiated by the members of parliament that has anticipated something like the pandemic, anticipated the occurrence and also anticipated the actual provision of proper care and cure and care. So it takes you back to the realms of all these inquiries into the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence, inquiries into the racist policing in Brixton, headed by Leslie Scarman, the inquiry into the criminality of the media, the Levison inquiry, chaired by Brian Levison, now a former High Court judge. If you look at the inquiry into the massacre, the fire massacre in 2017 in Kensington and Chelsea, in that building. As we have said, the massacre was a massacre because they could have scrambled military choppers carrying water, and they could have doused the fire. They would have taken out the main substance of the weight of the blazes that burned these people alive. They didn't do that. The unique the unique architecture of the area, stunningly accessible from all four sides, because the building was absolutely isolated from other buildings, and nothing could prevent physically that building being accessed by military helicopters carrying water. Now, I have been saying this for years. No one has been saying that at all. Very significant, isn't it? The Guardian isn't saying it, the Times isn't saying it, no member of parliament has said it. Nobody. But that would have been the clue. And that is the clue. They allowed these people to die, intentionally allowed these people to die. Because during the night, you could see on live television the fire raging for hours. The helicopters would not have needed that long to put out the fire and save most of the people. We call it Grenfell massacre. So if you look at the picture, you can see that there is nothing. On all four sides of the building, there is nothing else. And nobody has said that question, has asked that question. So this is one of the world exclusive original questions that we have been asking and we have been asserting. So the massacre is not used, the word is not used, and the inquiry is a complete, absolute diversion, typical. So, all the inquiries, the so called public inquiries, are only relevant for the consumption, for the consumption of the little Englanders, the brainwashed majority. As I said, they would lay wreaths and they would use the tissue paper, the Quentin lets the liar says in the Times today. But that's it. They would not take action to stop the liars in government, liars in parliament, liars in the media from lying, liars in the judiciary. You look at the centuries of the license law trading. The four Inns of Court, which issue the license for what they call barristers, these are nothing to do with justice, nothing to do with knowledge, nothing to do with the actual morality, compassion, accountability. These are to do with the perpetration of careers. And no judge who is a criminal, who is a liar, who is a racist, is subject to accountability. How can that be? You can't get rid of Boris Johnson even after he has, time and again, he has officially been declared as no longer an MP. You can't still get rid of him. What does it say about this society? Decline is not the word, it's worse. So, what this society or the population needs is the exact opposite of what Starmer is proposing. And the reason why Starmer is being prepared to get into number 10 Downing Street is not because the establishment, the criminals, want the founding aims and purpose of the Labour Party to be applied. They want him there because, precisely because of the opposite. They don't want him there for the Labour Party's aims and purposes. They want him there to continue the corruption, criminality, lack of accountability, lack of care, lack of compassion that dominate what the Conservatives have been doing, what Johnson has been doing, what the liar Theresa May has been doing, what the sleazeball criminal David Cameron has been doing. What we shall be doing is slowly bring to an end this hour long introduction and a glimpse. Of course, we are not going to be able to do the other aspects of the updates. We said this one in the Surah Al Isra. In the Surah Al Isra, there is this الباطل كان زهوقا وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا وقل جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. So this is the short paraphrased interpretation with the revelation of the Holy Quran and the messages to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. The declaration is the truth has arrived and falsehood has disappeared, perished. Innal batila kana zahuqa. And it is inevitable that falsehood shall perish. Now, where on earth, anywhere on the face of the earth, is this necessary and not being implemented? As clear a reassurance, as clear a confidence booster for all the fighters against falsehood and lies. Innal batila kana zahuqa. Nothing could be more appropriate. And yet, everywhere, darkness is gathering. In the case of Pakistan, where whatever his background in the past, Imran Khan has begun to talk about the true independence of the country. But neither Imran Khan himself nor any of his known allies and colleagues on the front bench of the Tehreek-e-Insaf party are doing anything that I noticed that shows with confidence that the Hakiki Azadi is being advanced, advocated by truthfully saying and adhering to Innal Batila Kana Zahuqa. The fact that Imran Khan is mired in so many litigation issued against him by the crooks in the regime, of course, is not to be blamed on him, but it cannot be ignored. How did he end up there? So we shall be updating on all of these as well as checking on what is happening with the publicly available information about how one of the four girls from Bethnal Green, this one which left the United Kingdom in December for Syria, Sharmina Begum, groomed in effect by the so-called Sisters Forum based at the complex where the East London Mosque is in Whitechapel Road, London E1. How did she get converted into an awareness where they said to her that if she went to Syria, joined the ISIS, and became a martyr, she would be meeting her deceased mother in the fastest way possible. Now, quite apart from what she did, this is evident. This is on the online this morning, today, Wednesday, the 14th of June 2023, on the internet, and no action is being taken about how these women, so called Sisters Forum, went about brainwashing this Sharmina Begum. And Lutfur Rahman, the so called elected mayor in the case, in the name of Tar Hamlets, is maintaining his own careerist, opportunist, dishonest silence. So we shall be updating on all of these in due course. And this is coming at 0840 hours GMT, just over an hour. And we have 8:40 GMT on Wednesday, the 14th of June 2023.